Is it go ahead and punched in?
All right, well, thanks everyone for coming. If we have any additional people joining, I'll just let them in as we go. But thank you guys for joining us for Storytime with Lynn today. My name is Katie Fine. I am the new Director of Development and Outreach. Oh, can you guys see me? I have to stop sharing.
Can't see you.
I'm the new Director of Development and Outreach here at Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation. I've been here, I think I'm coming up on 2 months, so I'm really excited to see and participate in my first story time with Lynn, and just get to meet all of our faithful followers. We are going to start here in a little bit, but I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm going to be dropping the donation link into the chat box. So if you guys feel so inclined to donate, we would really appreciate that. And the way that today is going to work is we are going to, Lynn is going to read a story out of her book, and she will tell you a little bit more about that. And then we will have some time for question and answer at the end. If you don't feel like verbalizing your question and you just want to drop it in the chat box, that's great too. I can read it out at the end as well. And just remember to unmute yourself whenever you would like to say something. So with that, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, well, I'm unmuted, so I'm going to start. Thanks everybody for joining us again. This is always a great time for us to get together as virtually, as it is such a common thing nowadays. And the story that I'm reading about today, the animal I'm reading about today, is a elderly ewe. As y'all know, we've been rescuing farmed animals for quite some time. And this is one of our early stories, and so many of the stories I tell are early stories. And hopefully y'all will enjoy this one. For years now, WRR has on occasion rescued chickens, ducks, geese, and other animals commonly found on farms. One of the very first such animals we rescued was a sad, mother, black-faced ewe. Suffolk sheep have the most wonderful faces that go with their rotund, off-white, wool-covered bodies. Their faces are solid black, matching their equally ebony hooves. This particular female was quite large and quite old. She'd been used as a breeder sheep, horrible term, producing lambs who were always fat and beautiful and healthy. But now that she had grown old, this would no longer be possible for her. 3 days after the lamb who would be her last baby was born, it was clear that her life would never be the same. The tiny black-faced lamb was small, but looked healthy enough. He stood and wobbled and fell, but got up again and stood strong and steady as he nudged his mother's tummy, looking for the first sign of a good meal. He suckled for several minutes, then dropped into a bed of hay next to his mother and fell asleep. This ritual was repeated hour after hour for the first 24 hours of his young life. By day 2, the newborn ram was only interested in eating once or twice in the morning. By midday, he wanted only to sleep safe and comfortable next to his proud mother. There is no doubt that the mother sheep knew something was not right with her baby, but she never let on. She cleaned him, licked his tiny black mouth, kept him warm, and never left his side to go out into the pasture with the other sheep. She was devoted and loving. It did not matter to her that all of her knowledge as an experienced mother kept telling her that something was terribly wrong with her little one. Well after midnight on the 3rd day of the young ram's life, the chances for his survival rapidly diminished. Before daybreak, he began to cry out for his mother. He wanted to stand, but could not. He had grown weak and could only lay in the warm hay. Mother sheep licked, cleaned, and nudged at her baby. She called to him, letting him know that she was near. Staying close, she watched as he grew weaker. She listened as his cries became audible only to her ears. When her people came to check on the ewe and her new lamb, their eyes were met with this sad scene. An old mother sheep, her last baby, dying quietly by her side, and she trying her best to care for the infant who was so quickly slipping away from her. For all of these years, all these people had thought of was what a wonderful breeder this female sheep had been. All they cared about was the lambs she would provide for their stock. But now they realized that for all these years, something much more had been going on before their very eyes, something they had watched but had never really seen. They stayed with the two sheep. They sat as the mother licked her now cold, dead baby. They cried as she nudged his soft black muzzle, hoping he would respond, stand, and once again probe her tummy for dinner. But there was no response from the little infant. He had slipped away from her, even as she stood watching over him. Even as he lay beside her, somehow he had slipped away. It was mid-morning before they could take the baby away to bury him in a nearby field. As they did, so Mother Sheep watched. She never took her eyes off them or her dead baby. She followed at a distance and saw exactly where they put him. And it was there that they would find her every morning, every night, there where her last baby was buried. This went on for days until everyone watching knew something had to be done. When the call came in to Wildlife Rescue, we were not certain that we could help. The old sheep, it seemed, had lost her desire to live. But perhaps a change of scenery and a tiny orphaned goat could help. We instructed the farmers to bring the elderly ewe to the sanctuary, and we would try our very best, keep our fingers crossed, and hope that our plan would work. We were not just thinking of the sheep, for we also had a problem child to consider. A week or so before the sheep call, we had been asked to take in a baby goat. He was one of twins. His mother had rejected him, for she barely had enough milk for one tiny baby. We were doing everything in our power to interest this orphan in a bottle of formula, and we were failing miserably. It was late on a Tuesday afternoon when the despondent ewe arrived. Her beautiful black head drooped from her once strong shoulders. Her eyes showed no sign of interest in her new surroundings. We led her into a fenced area where there was lush green grass, a three-sided wooden shelter, and a tall oak tree offering itself as shade for the old sheep with a sad face. The old girl walked about the pasture, munched on some small sprigs, made her way to the shelter, and plopped down, depressed, into the waiting bed of hay and alfalfa. It seemed that she was ready to give up, but little did she know that only yards away was a thin but determined little baby who had other plans for her and his future. The only question was, do we wait to introduce the two, or do we throw caution to the wind and move forward with our plan for them? As is usually the case, the non-human animals have plans of their own, and this time was no exception. The baby goat was coal black, except for a large splash of white over his left eye and a few matching dots on his cute little rump. Everyone at Wildlife Rescue lovingly called him Oreo. Since he was a domesticated animal, we all agreed it was all right to bestow a name on this little ram. Oreo was bedded down in a big carrier just the other side of the fence that separated him from the old girl sheep. His appetite was not great, but his shiny black nose was working just fine, because in no time he began to sniff the rich air. His stub of a tail twitched, and his curiosity led him out of the carrier and directly to the wire fence. Oreo's small head poked through an opening in the mesh barrier. He pushed and strained, and in minutes had managed to squeeze his frail frame through to the other side. The spring grass was almost as tall as little Oreo. It brushed his tummy and swallowed up his short legs, but it did not keep him from his goal. Something told him there was a mother hiding that pasture, and he was going to find her. We watched as little Oreo stumbled through the field. What we knew to be only several yards must have seemed like miles to his thin body. He cried out. It was to us a sad and desperate cry, but to the longing ears of a lonely mother sheep, It was an all too familiar cry for help. Mother sheep baaed back. Did she think this was her lost lamb, even after she witnessed his burial? Had he somehow come back to her? No, probably not. But it did not seem to matter. Oreo cried out even louder now. He knew she was there, somewhere in that tall grass. He knew she was waiting. He could smell her, and now he could even hear her. Mother sheep called out again, and this time she could see who had been calling to her. Would it matter to her that this was not her little baby? Oreo ran as best he could to the old sheep. He immediately began butting his tiny head into her soft tummy. Old sheep moved away. She pushed Oreo with her big black head, and he fell into the tall grass. This was not her lost lamb. She now knew this was not her baby. Oreo stood up, stumbled after the sheep, and tried again and again. She rejected him. She walked back to her shelter and now looked more alone than ever. Old girl sheep lay down in the hay. Oreo found his way to her side, and there he stood, looking at his now mother, who did not act like a mother, this mother who had milk, but not for him. Our plan had failed. We would have to try again with a bottle of formula for little Oreo and hope this time it would help. We decided to leave them together. At least they had each other's company. Hours passed. Oreo would not take our bottle, and we once again had to resort to feeding him with a stomach tube. He cried out and struggled. He hated this method of feeding more than we hated to have to inflict it on him. The warm formula began to fill his tummy, but quickly Oreo pulled away, and as he did, he yanked the tube out of his mouth. The milk squirted all over his face, and again he cried out in frustration. He was hungry, and no one seemed to be able to give him what he wanted. Oreo stood there crying, his face covered with milk. We reached for a towel that was sitting on the top of the shelter, and as we turned back to little Oreo, there was Mother Sheep doing our work for us. The once sad mother saw a baby with a dirty face, heard him crying to be fed, and she could not resist. Oreo's tail was wagging in sheer delight, and now the old mother sheep was once again caring for a baby. It did not matter that he had not been her baby. For now, as far as she was concerned, Oreo was her little lamb. So that's today's story. Does anybody have any questions at all or comments? I do want to say that one of the reasons that we started rescuing farmed animals, aside from the fact that I'd wanted to do it for many years and we just didn't have the land, was because there are so many of them who are in peril every day. There are so many of them who are thought of as only breeder animals or food animals, somehow expendable and not important. So we've rescued a great many of them over the years. We have a great many of them still at the sanctuary today. And they are, as y'all can imagine, absolutely wonderful, wonderful beings, intelligent, sensitive, wonderful beings. And we are thrilled, as we have been for many years, that we can provide a really good sanctuary for so many of them.
We have a couple of comments and questions, Lynn. Tim Duda, and Tim, correct me if I'm mispronouncing it, but he asked a question, but it almost seems like a statement. He said, is there any doubt that animals have feelings and show emotions?
Never has been any doubt for me, Tim.
Yep.
Nice to see you and see your name again.
And Mary Hill asked, how many years were they together?
Oh gosh, well, the mother sheep, she only lived for about another 5 years. And then of course, by then the baby was older, but they did stay together. He became part of the sheep herd. And then when she passed, he stayed with the sheep herd. So he was a goat who lived with a bunch of sheep, but he understood the language. He related to them. They related to him. And he was just one of them.
A happy ending.
Sometimes we get those.
Yes.
And McKay, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but she said a very touching story. Thank you.
Made me cry. Sniffling
Well,
here.
These stories, when I've written a great many of them over the years and seen a great many more that I've written about over the years, and It is. I mean, it does. Your heart is just broken repeatedly, over and over and over and over again in this kind of work. And then every so often, unfortunately, because of so many animals who we do rescue, there's so many of them. The odds of us getting more happy endings is good because there are so many animals.
I know.
And when that happens, it's great. And those are the ones that I try to remember, all of us at Wildlife Rescue, to remember those. We all have to remember that we feel, oddly enough, we feel the losses, I think, more acutely than we feel the successes and the happy endings. And it makes sense in a lot of ways because we want them all to do well, and that's not possible. That's certainly not going to happen for every one of them. But for those it happens for, it's a wonderful moment. And every time it happens, and every time that we yet again witness the depth of feeling and compassion, sensitivity, intellect, all those things that non-humans have, we feel sorry for, sad about, and how tragic it is that most people don't ever see that in non-human animals. Don't ever realize it, see it, have any awareness of it.
I'm amazed at the different breeds that take up with each other, like this. So many of your stories in the magazine relate that, and it's just wonderful that they will do that.
Well, and I think it's important to tell those stories because, again, we assume minimal attachment, minimal ability, emotional ability to non-human animals. We assume minimal everything about them. Mm-hmm. We think that they're operating on this magical thing called instinct and that they're just kind of going along their day. And that's just not true. It's not who they are. There's instinct present there, of course, but they are so much more than we realize, and so much more than we usually get to see. I mean, one of the wonderful things about doing this work for, going on almost 45 years now, I mean, my God, the things that I've seen these animals do, and interestingly, I will say, I was never surprised. I was awestruck, and always am, and always will be, but not surprised, because a lot of people are surprised. They're surprised when animals care for each other, whether they're the same species or different breeds with domesticated animals, whatever it happens to be. A lot of people are surprised by that. And I like to say to everybody, don't be surprised, because that's who they are. That's who they've always been. That's who they always will be. We're the blockheads, as I said earlier. We're the ones who don't, we're the ones who don't get it. We're the ones who don't see. We're the ones who don't want to see that, because if we saw that, if we accepted, realized, and took all that into our understanding of them, we couldn't do what we do to them anymore. And that's what people don't want. People don't want to stop doing what they do to animals. They want to be able to continue to use them. And if we gave them the credit they are due, then we'd have to change our behavior. And humans are not good about changing behavior.
Mary Hill asked if we have any baboons at WRR.
We do not. Baboons are one of the species of primates who we do not rescue because we simply don't have as much land as they really need, because they're so big. But there are other really good primate sanctuaries who do rescue baboons. So we are able to, anytime we get a call about a baboon in trouble, we are able to refer them to a sanctuary that we know and trust.
That's all the questions in the chat. Oh, let's see. Oh, McKaylee just sent us a little story about, let's see, a hummingbird.
Wow.
Built a nest outside her window. Would you like me to read it?
Please.
Okay. She said, a hummingbird built a tiny nest outside my office window. The nest was about as big as a quarter. She was a good mother, laid her eggs, and stayed with them. One egg didn't hatch, but she fed the one baby until it died too. For the next 3 days, she came back and circled the nest several times a day, almost as if she were mourning and looking for the remaining baby. Then she was gone.
Oh,
I'm sure she was mourning. I mean, that's, again, mourning is something they do. They're not oblivious to loss. They take loss to heart, I mean, they do. And that's just, and we don't even know how much loss these poor animals experience every day. We don't, because you look at those tiny little baby hummingbirds. Look at, like she said, the nest was this big, and many of them do survive, but my God, that any of them do. It's just astounding. But there's a great deal of loss that these animals go through all the time, and it's tragic. But again, they just keep going on. You know, they just keep going on.
She said she felt the loss herself as if she had lost a member of her family.
Yeah, well, that's right. If you're sensitive and open to other beings, that is how it feels. It really does feel that way. So I understand that feeling very well. Well, does anybody have any other comments or questions? Well, thank you all for joining us again and for listening to yet another story. It's always wonderful to be able to, as I said, to get together this way. And we'll be doing it again in the coming months.
Yes, and it was wonderful to meet all of you guys. I did drop the donation link in the chat box, but also be on the lookout for our upcoming food drive. So we have our annual food drive every year. This year it is August 27th to September 3rd. So we'll be sending out emails, going on social media and all of those things. So we'd love to have you guys support us there as well.
And thanks to all of you for being so kind and so generous to Wildlife Rescue. You all know that nothing gets done without you. Absolutely nothing gets done without you.
Yeah. Wish I could do more.
Well, that's how we all feel. So you're in very good company.
Yes.
Very true.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time around.